which it was not lawful for him or his companions to eat, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and yet are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.
He left that place and entered their synagogue. A man was there with a withered hand, and they asked him,
"Is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath?"
so that they might accuse him. He said to them,
Suppose one of you has only one sheep, and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath. Will you not lay hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a human being than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath.
Then he said to the man,
Stretch out your hand.
He stretched it out, and it was restored as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him, how to destroy him.
I didn't check all these slides, didn't I? That's all right. We'll give you a little
That's
help.
why he wore the machine out.
I think you're right. I think you're right. We hit chapter 12. Only 16 more to go in Matthew. And again we see this confrontation, or I should say, the author of Matthew creates these confrontations. And I just want to remind you, they're not confrontations. They were healthy discussions, debates, arguments, whichever word you want to use, where these Pharisees and Sadducees wanted to know, what did Jesus think? Was he one of them, or was he an Essene, or was he a Zealot, or was he someone else? Taking that into account, the laws of the Sabbath, I want to start by showing you this very, very large and very, very thick book, over 1,500 pages. This book, everyone see it in the back, Mick? Can you read it from the back? No. I'm going to get him opera glasses just for fun. Anyway, this book is from the Babylonian Talmud, written around 200 CE, and it has in here the practices of the days of Jesus. What the people were told they could do, what they couldn't do. What's interesting about this is that it's really thick. And if I open it up, everyone can tell that it's an extremely small print. I need one of those magnifiers for this bad boy. It is tiny, tiny print. And this book is all about the laws of the Sabbath in Jesus' day. That's what they did. Now tell me, that's not a lot to know. So you have this opportunity for Jesus to say, or to talk about God's law of the Sabbath versus man-made laws of the Sabbath. And a lot of these are still in place today, which is really scary in a way. Imagine if they put that in large print, it would probably be about this thick, wouldn't it? But that's what we're looking at, and we're asking about it. So, Jesus is going to be questioned about the Sabbath because these groups want to know of this gigantic, thick book of laws, which ones do you say, yeah, that's a good law, and which ones do you say, no, you don't have to do that, because God did define what the Sabbath was all about. And it's very well defined through history. But by the time we get to Jesus' day, this is what happens. And these laws, most of them started to be created about 250 years before Jesus. And here we are. I got to put it down because it's too heavy to carry. I almost had to get a special cart to so heavy. Actually, all 40 books are a lot bigger and they are that heavy. So we have this question, and Jesus turns around and talks about David. And I know everybody remembers the David story, but I will refresh your memory just in case. Right, Trish?
Yes.
Trish usually knows these stories when I ask her 11. She's got them down pat. David and his buddies were running away from King Saul, who was trying to kill him. Which was interesting because if you remember, David married one of the daughters, Michal, of King Saul. So they're kind of related in a way. But the people really loved David and they didn't like Saul. That's the way it reads in 1 Samuel. And they're running away from him and they're going to be killed and they're worried about that. And they show up where the tabernacle was in the city of Hebron, and they were hungry. And they went into the tabernacle, and there was a table, an altar, if you will, you can call it that, like this one, and a loaf of bread. Now, the translation said the presence. It was called a showbread. It basically was a hunk of bread that was dedicated to God. And the only people allowed to eat the bread were the priests. In those days, it was good to be the priest. Because you got the bread, you got the wine offering, and you probably had a barbecue just about every day. Because somebody had a sin and brought in some animal. So you're not supposed to eat the bread. But when David got in there, the priest that was in charge at that moment, it changed every couple hours, said, "You're really hungry. Your men are really hungry." And he picked the bread off the table and said, "I want you to have it." Interesting story. The priests were also allowed to do sacrifices. Well, let me go back a second. So what does that say? Showing mercy is okay on the Sabbath. Because it would have been, according to this big book, it was work to pick that bread up and give it to David. I know that sounds silly to us, isn't it? People thought so much differently. This would have been 3,000 years ago. So they showed mercy to David, who was starving. Therefore, on the Sabbath, you're allowed to show mercy. Random acts of kindness or any kind of kindness. The second one has to do with sacrifices. Because Jesus said, "I want loyalty, not sacrifice." Where did sacrifice come from? All of us have read Numbers, chapter 18, 9 to 10. Priests could sacrifice animals on Sabbath. They were allowed to do that. So sacrifice is acceptable on Sabbath. Maybe today we call it tithing. Who knows what it is. But you're allowed to sacrifice, right? So you're allowed to show mercy, allowed to show sacrifice. And it's going to be one more in a second. And then Jesus says that he is the Lord of the Sabbath. And I always wondered, what exactly does that mean? And he's saying to these religious leaders that he has the right to direct Sabbath adherence. What laws did you make up versus what laws are truly God's? And what he's really saying is stop following man-made laws. You follow God's laws. That's where you should be. Because he just continued that way. But then we have this Hosea quote from Hosea 6, which I put up there because most of us don't even remember Hosea. He's one of those little minor prophets. But it said in Matthew, but if you had known what this means, I desire compassion and not sacrifice. And then he's quoting right out of Hosea 6. Now, real quick reminder, whenever Jesus quotes a verse, we call them verses, out of the scripture, from the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, he's talking about the whole chapter. That's the way we divided it. They divided things differently. And you didn't have to say to someone, "Oh, here's verse 6, but don't forget everything that's before and after it." People knew this story. They knew the Hosea story. They knew what he was talking about. And if you go into the book of Hosea and take a look at it, it says that following God's law was more important than sacrifice. It's better to not break the law opposed to breaking the law and asking forgiveness later. That always reminds me of Admiral Hopper, who said it is easier to apologize than to ask permission. She was wrong according to Jesus. Don't break the law and then turn around and make a sacrifice. What did Hosea say? Because you got to have all of Hosea. He actually said that sacrifice was like dew on wheat. It doesn't hang around very long, does it? Because the sun comes up and burns off the dew. That sacrificing, saying, oh God, I'm sorry, I broke your law, should be superseded by not breaking the law. Oh, that sounds pretty simple. Because Hosea said, you're going to break the law, you're going to sacrifice, and 5 minutes later you're going to say, okay, I'm cool. And totally forget that you broke the law, meaning you're going to go do it again. Hosea was really big on that. So it's better to follow the law than it is to come back and ask for forgiveness. Everyone should remember that the Sabbath was declared in the Ten Commandments and that we're supposed to keep it holy. It gets established as a holy day by Moses because he's the one who receives these 10 commandments. And when he comes back down to Israel, he says, we are going to put the Sabbath into place because God said so. It is a gift from God. It's a day of rest. But you are allowed to do 3 things that we just saw in the Old Testament. You're allowed to eat. Now, where's that one actually come from? It is in the Old Testament. It's also, isn't it, in this story? You got guys walking down a field, they're grabbing some grain and eating it. Oh, you can't do that. That's work. No, God said you got to eat. You got to take care of the animals. You got to feed the kids. Let's keep on. Think of how thin we would all be if we just wouldn't eat on the Sabbath day. Since we call that Sunday, we're in trouble. That means we have to do communion on Saturday because we're going to fast on Sunday. You guys be okay with that, right? They're laughing right now. I'm just telling you. People who are watching. Remember, we are live streaming it, so they're laughing, sort of. But they do it under their breath. But that's okay. So you're permitted to eat. You're permitted to make sacrifices. Of course, in Jesus' day, that meant grain, wine, animal, things like that. We don't do those sacrifices anymore. But there are modern ways to sacrifice if you want to. But the third one, which is what comes after the healing of the guy with the withered hand, you're allowed to heal on the Sabbath. That is considered an act of mercy, which actually, it says you can't do that in this book. And Jesus is saying, but that's an act of mercy. So God says we can eat. Now, instead of sacrificing animals, we come here and you listen to me. That's a sacrifice on your part. And the fact that you're not asleep yet. And then do acts of mercy. Healing is one of them. Not smashing into the guy who cut me off this morning on the Felton Road with nobody behind me, doing 20 miles an hour down the Felton Road. That's why I was late today. There's nowhere to pass on the Felton Road. And you're like, oh man, I wish I had that indestructible bumper. I would have taken care of that problem. I did an act of kindness. I didn't say anything. No gestures. I just went slow. Montana wasn't happy. She likes going fast. So you're allowed to do that. Now, why would Jesus and his disciples walk through a wheat field? Would any of you do that here? Well, of course not, because we have roads. I know Pennsylvania, using the word roads kind of iffy. They didn't have very many roads, if at all. So people would walk through wheat fields. And of course the farmers don't like that, because you don't want your wheat trampled. It's a little hard to sell it when it's got footprints on it. But it was okay and it was permitted. And it was permitted that you could grab a handful of that weed and eat it. That's considered an act of kindness. Because if you're doing that, you must be hungry. There were no Burger Kings on the corner, or Wendy's, or whichever one you happen to like. So these guys are hungry. That's fine. They take a little. Now, they would get a little upset if you showed up in the middle of the night and started harvesting their wheat. Farmers would get a little upset about that. And in fact, during the harvest time, the season, guess where the farmers were? They slept out in the fields. They had the dogs out in the fields. And if anybody came by, could be interesting. But to come through and you're walking through the field and you grab a handful, that's considered an act of kindness. That's charity, isn't it? Because those guys must be hungry and they didn't have any food in their little nappy sack, so they grabbed somebody just grabbed a handful. But is it work because they had, you know what wheat you have to do with wheat? You have to separate the chaff. And what they did is they rubbed it on their hands and then you blew the chaff, now you can eat it. Well, that's considered work. If you go by that rule, then you had better prepare on Saturday all your meals for Sunday. Because you can't cook on Sunday, can you? Well, yes, you can. But not in Jesus' day. They didn't like that. So, we take all of this and say, what is Jesus telling us? And I think there's two things. One, learn God's law from what God gave us in His Word. Know what the Ten Commandments are. Know what it says in Leviticus and Numbers. And when you read that and say, I don't understand what it says, go to the Gospels and see what Jesus said. Because He gives us the definitions. Learn the law, because if you do, then leadership of church can't do this to us. They can't do this because we know God's law. So the second part I think He's saying here is simplification. It's not that complex. There's not that much you have to know and do. Just learn God's law, and I say it, learn God's law the way Jesus tells us to implement it and to live by it. And don't worry about all this complexity. Make it simple. Wow, just think about that. It's not that tough. And when church leadership says, oh, now you got to do this and now you got to do that, it's our place to question. In the same way that Jesus questioned these religious leaders saying, why are you making us do these things? Why are you complicating our lives? And generally, when it's done, it's because it's done for control. If I can tell you when you can do this and when you can do that and this, and you can see how you could lose control of your own life, and all of a sudden, religious leaders in Jesus' day are telling people what time to get up, and what time to go to sleep, and when to eat, when to pray. Well, you've got control. So He's saying, get rid of all that. It's simple, isn't it? Follow God's law as Jesus has interpreted it.